it chose me. The wind whistled through the birch grove like a bottle necked with teeth, and something old and hungry threaded that sound into my bones until I could taste metal under my tongue. I was 3 weeks into a brutal insomnia spiral, and grieving a marriage I pretended wasn't already dead. So when the dog whined at the back door again, I took it as a mercy that gave my hands something to do besides texting a number that no longer needed me. Out past the alley, beyond the garden's rotting tomatoes, the municipal trail unfurled toward the river like a black ribbon, slick with the season's first wet leaves, and pinned by a full moon smudged with cloud. Micah, my rescue mutt, half shepherd, half question, was a creature of silent alarms. Ears pricked, weight canted, breath held the way a child holds it underwater to count how long until the burn. She knows the night. Then the breeze shifted, and her whole body hardened into a single soundless point, aiming toward the birches that border the playfield by St. Cyril's, where the flyers stapled to the fence had begun to fray into lace. The missing faces had multiplied this fall. A tabby with one blind eye, 2 retirees who never came back from their evening walk, a kid named Benji, whose mother stood on the corner every dusk like a statue, holding up another day of hope. Bathroom Micah, I whispered, yanking my hoodie tighter as if cotton could turn back whatever the wind ferried down from the river. The air had an old copper tang, like pennies sucked too long, and each breath iced my throat. The night had sharp edges, and my heart had soft ones that bruised at the thought of my ex's toothbrush still living in my bathroom drawer without a reason. The first whistle threaded the branches as we reached the birches, a high, thin note that bloomed into a child's tune I couldn't place, a melody learned once and misremembered, ring around the know, something older with the wrong number of steps. Micah leaned into her leash so hard the leather moaned. I followed her stare, and that's when I saw it. Not a thing, not yet, but a hollow in the dark that seemed to move because it made the dark around it hold still. In the unlit seam between the last street lamp and the birch trunks, the air felt crowded, like a room that has just lost someone and hasn't figured out how to rearrange the furniture. Benji, I said before I knew I'd thought the name, because the whistle hiccuped into a breathy little laugh that only ever belongs to the small and the recently forgiven. The shape separated from shadow, the way frost separates from glass. When the room warms, a little body stepped into the spill of moonlight, naked, but for a layer of dirt and dead leaves clinging to the blue of his skin. And I recognized his face from the flyers, except it took me a second to map a picture into flesh. He was barefoot, and his toenails had gone the color of old milk. His hair was matted with burrs. His eyes were too big for a face that hadn't been fed in weeks. Cold, he said, a word that wobbled, and his lips couldn't quite catch it. I shrugged out of my hoodie so fast I forgot my phone was in the pocket, until it hit the path with a crack like ice breaking. "Hey," I said, crouching. palms up like the training videos tell you to. The way I wish someone had approached me when my life fell apart in September, and I forgot how to swallow anything but grief. Micah made a sound I'd never heard from her, a strangled whine threaded with a growl, two notes braided like barbed wire. It's okay, I lied to the child, to my dog, to the part of me that knows a wrong note when it vibrates inside a bone. The wind died, as if a hand had closed around the throat of the night. The whistle repeated, but this time it wasn't the trees, it was the boy. His chest heaved, and he tipped his head like a bird reading sky math, as if moonlight wrote instructions on the leaves. His spine arched as if pulled by invisible thread, and a sound poured out of him. Not voice, but wet creek. Not one noise, but many small ones. The conversation bones have with each other when a body decides to change the terms of its agreement with gravity. If anyone asks, I'll swear this. I tried to wrap him in my hoodie. I tried to call for help. I tried to find an adult who could outrun this. But I was the adult, and there was no outrunning the way his clavicles unhooked like latches, the way his shoulders rolled back with a crunch like apples stepped on in a cellar, the way his hands shed their nails like leaves and sprouted new knuckles that didn't belong to human wrists. I can tell you how his mouth cracked wide and wider until it was a wound with teeth. How the teeth arrived late like guests who know the rules don't apply to them. Serrated. And too many. How his eyes stayed the same blue the whole time. Earnest and suffering and blue. Stop, I said to no one who could, because what unspools has to finish, or it tangles everything. When he slammed forward onto all fours, there was nothing child left but sorrow, a lank, underfed wolf thing slick with its making, fur scalloped away in odd deserts of mangy skin, legs too long like a foal's first minutes, steam lifting from its back where the moon found it. Micah peed herself and didn't break eye contact. She backed, tail tucked so hard it erased itself. The thing blinked, slow, as if each lid was surprised to meet the other, then lifted its muzzle and sang a note so pure the birches bowed. I ran. Not far. There isn't far when the path loops back on itself, and every porch light at the park's edge is a ship's lantern that doesn't know the sea is already inside it, but enough to teach my lungs new shapes. The creature loped with a limp like a broken metronome, unsteady from the cost of becoming, and I smelled the sick sweet copper of its breath even before I felt the heat of it against my calf. Micah darted sideways, yanking me off balance, so the first swipe missed me and scooped only air. And I learned what it is to love something that wants nothing from you but to keep moving. We hit the gate to the alley at speed. The latch stuck. My fingers couldn't arithmetic the steps. Behind me, the creature's claws stuttered on asphalt, then found purchase, screeching a chord that set my teeth to buzzing. The latch gave, and we squeezed through, slamming it back with a clang that echoed down 1,000 old arguments. It hit the chain link full bore, and the whole fence convulsed. A bigger thing shaking a smaller thing, as if to rattle out the stubborn. "Inside," I told Micah, and she shot through the kitchen door like a prayer that finally found its mouth. I swung the deadbolt and pressed my forehead to the wood, and the house breathed quiet around us. A hush, like a baptism, reversed. Then something began to scratch at the back door, soft as if it had learned manners from somewhere polite, soft as if to say, "Let me in, I know your name." And I understood, shaking and stupid with the suddenness of faith, that the thing outside had worn a boy like a coat, and now wanted to try on my life. When my phone finally buzzed across the tile where it had fallen, it crawled into light and showed me a missed call. Nora. The name broke something in me that had been holding still out of habit, and I laughed, a sound that had edges, and Micah pressed her ribs to my shin to teach me breath again. The scratching paused, as if listening, then resumed with less patience, and the doorframe shivered, and I looked around my kitchen for a weapon, and found only the mirror my grandmother left me, an old thing with foxed silver, where years had gnawed away the backing. When the claws finally punched through the bottom panel of the door, they recoiled from the mirror as if burned. Sometimes the rules are not new. Sometimes they wait on our shelves for us to remember how to read them. I lifted the mirror, and it reflected something that wasn't my kitchen, and the thing on my porch stepped back, confused, a broken foal again. "Not tonight," I told it, as if that were how nights worked, outside, somewhere between the birches and the river. Someone started to scream a name I knew from the flyers, and the thing turned its head toward the sound, and I understood what it loved. By dawn, the porch was a crime scene of splinters and paw blood, a lattice of gouges coppering in the blue light, and my grandmother's mirror had a thumb-sized blister of silver blackened and bubbling, where the creature's reflection had tried to climb inside and failed. I slept an hour sitting against the fridge, waking to the sound of Micah's paws ticking anxious Morse code on the tile, a code that said, "Still here, still here, still here." The chill didn't lift with the sun. It took up rooms as if paying rent, and the radio turned itself into a eulogy channel by 9 as St. Cyril's bells tolled for a vigil they hadn't promised and couldn't cancel. Nora texted, then called, then texted again. Heard the police on Oak. "Are you okay? Please answer." She had left in a quiet that was not unkind, the sort of leaving that takes its shoes off at the door and folds the blanket before it goes, because it was still love, just a kind that had nowhere else to live. I typed and erased 3 drafts that lied, and 2 that told the truth, and settled on. Went for a walk. Found a boy. Not a boy. Can you come? She arrived in a jacket that still remembered my shoulders, bringing with her the smell of a coffee shop that saves your life for $2 at a time. She crouched to greet Micah first, because she had always been fluent, then stood and took in the door like an X-ray tech, reading a familiar tumor's growth. "Tell me," she said, and I did. And because she believes in the person I try to be when no one is watching, she believed me and we began to plan a war. This is how we decided to fight a thing with no name. Not with courage, which is a performance for crowds and medals, but with petty domestic rituals wielded like knives. We layered mirrors facing outward along the threshold and windows, old ones from the basement and new ones from the thrift store that still had sticker ghosts in their corners. We salted the sill without knowing if that belonged to another kind of story. We braided Micah's fur into a cord and tied it around my wrist, because that's how you keep from being taken across a threshold in the oldest fairy tales. And we wrote down the names of the missing on index cards and tucked them under the mirror frames, because names are weights, and sometimes you have to anchor the live to the gone. The flyers at St. Cyril's fence had grown fresh edges. Someone had replaced the weather-torn with re-inked faces and brighter dates that kept the math cruelly current. Benji's mother had added a battery tea light beneath his picture, a small, stubborn coin of hope that punched above its lumen weight. Nora stood beside me, hands in pockets, chin tucked in, that posture that used to say embarrassment and now meant prayer. That song, I told her, and whistled the wrong note melody until my throat peeled, and we watched the birches hold their breath. We researched like grief had a bibliography, and the internet offered more stories than answers. A chorus of old country warnings translated badly and passed down like recipes, with every crucial measurement marked a pinch. Threads whispered that where things recoil from true silver, not just shine, and from their own faces, and from water that remembers itself, which meant running in a circle until the river knew your name. Another account argued for steel traps and shotguns, and the conviction that daylight is a cure-all, which is a beautiful lie told by people who haven't yet been taught how patient the night can be. Where does it come from? Nora asked, as if origins matter when your hands already shake. Where does hunger come from? I said, and hated how easy the metaphor found my mouth, because my own ache had become a thing with a collar and a leash I kept holding, even after my hand cramped. Nora's eyes softened, and for a moment we were back at June on the porch, laughing wine into the wrong cups, promising not to let our parents' silences become ours. The moment passed when the breeze changed and brought us the smell that doesn't belong to daylight: coin-hot air, soured fur, the sweet and rotten perfume of something that kills what it also loves. We followed the scent trail like amateurs, which is to say we walked where Micah's hackles led, and stopped where the ground held a story, little tufts of gray-brown fur caught on chain link, a scuffed divot in mud where something too heavy for its joints had stumbled, a line of paw prints that couldn't make up their mind about whose feet they were. The path kinked behind St. Cyril's, past the dumpster, where old altar flowers go to die sweet, and ended at the birch grove, where the soil was churned like a battlefield. Here, Nora said softly, kneeling by a tangle of hair that was not fur, long and white blonde, twined with burrs like a rosary gone feral. The whistle started again at full dark, not from the trees, but from the river's skin, a rippling air note that turned the visibility of the world one click lower. We had set the house like a trap for the thing, a bright square of glass-toothed windows and mirror-rimmed doors that made a funhouse of our own fear. Inside, every reflective surface showed a version of us we didn't recognize, braver, thinner, older, already haunted. We kept the lights low and our breath lower. We preloaded 911 and then deleted it because there are calls you don't make until the debt's already collected. When it came, it didn't come alone. First, the small shadows seeped through the chain-link gaps like water with bones, shapes that negotiated fence and yard as if the world were a word problem with a different answer. This time, a fox paused under the lilac and looked at me with eyes too flat to be fox. And a feral cat I'd once fed wove its tail around my ankles through the glass, as if auditioning for mercy. The big shape arrived late, and the others made room for it, the way a crowd parts before a saint, or a monarch, or a fire. It stood outside the kitchen like a guest with a bouquet of hunger. Micah's growl vibrated the cabinet doors. Nora's hand found mine and didn't let go. The most honest prayer either of us had managed since August. The thing stepped one paw onto the stoop and flinched when its reflection pooled across the glass of the back door. A ripple chasing itself and failing, it pressed its muzzle to the pane, and frost bloomed from its breath, writing a word we couldn't read because the letters kept choosing to be claws. It knocked. 3 soft taps with the back of a paw, polite as a child who's learned to pretend. "You can't come in," Nora said, because rules from other stories sometimes work if you speak them with your full mouth. The thing's head tilted, and in the tilt we saw a boy. And in the boy we saw our parents. And in them we saw all the doors we should never have opened. "Ask it what it wants," Nora whispered, and my name sounded like something you throw, not a thing you wear. "What do you want?" I asked, and the answer came not as a word, but as a picture. My kitchen, empty, my bed, cold, Micah's bowl, dry. A town without flyers, because there were no more faces left to print. "No," I said, and lifted the mirror. And for a heartbeat, the creature's reflection was not creature, but a child's face with river weed tangled in his lashes and teeth too sharp for milk. It struck the door then, all politeness gone, and the frame sobbed, and we ran our plan like a fire drill you hope to fail. Nora moved to the front hall to draw it there, where we'd laid the largest mirror at an angle. I baited the kitchen with the little silver picture frame my grandmother had carried to America sewn into her hem, a charm for wolves that had once had human names. Micah darted, nipping, distracting, then retreating before the swipe could collect her. The thing lunged, hit glass, and held a sound that started in its throat and finished in mine. It bled where the silver frame touched its chest, slow and thick, and the smell made a cathedral out of my mouth, incense and iron and old candle wax. It tore free and crashed down the hall, slamming into the big mirror with a noise like breaking lake ice in spring. And for a second, it was everywhere and nowhere, as if the house had become a throat swallowing, something too large and polite to choke. When it staggered, Nora swung the mirror up like a shield, and it recoiled, skin hissing where the foxed silver brushed fur. "Again," she said, voice gone flat with the part of bravery that wants to go home. And I shoved the picture frame into its ribs, where a human's heart would have hidden if it had still been human. The creature fell against the wall, and the family photos rained down, faces cracking under the weight of everyone we ever were. Its eyes found mine, and were so blue, so stupidly blue, that rage and mercy had to share a cup and pretend to like each other. "I'm sorry," it said no, not said. It moved its mouth around the shape of the apology, until the sound I heard in my head made me want to forgive the river itself. And then it bolted, limping, leaving a smear of itself on the hallway that Micah refused to walk through. We should have locked the doors and waited for dawn, which was a town over and not coming this way. Instead, deep in the logic of grief and hunger, we followed. Through the porch, into the cold that bit my lungs with new teeth, across the yard where our breath grew bodies, and sprinted ahead of us, into the alley where the chain link trembled as if something large had realized it could never be as small as it wanted to be. The whistle rose again from the birches, and this time I heard it for what it was, a lullaby someone had rewritten, so the sleep it promised had no waking. The path to the river had learned to lie about distance, stretching like taffy, contracting suddenly, so my knee met a root that wasn't where it learned to be in summer. The birches glowed like bones lit from within, and in their glow, we saw that the grove was not just a place where things happened, but an altar arranged by something with a long patience, feathers threaded with twine, a deer skull crusted with wax drippings, a child's rain boot filled with river pebbles, all set in a spiral that waited politely for us to notice. "This is a mouth," Nora said, and I understood that the river had teeth in places we call land. We found the creature not at the grove's center, but at its edge, at the place where a person might pause before admitting they've already chosen. It lay on its side, ribs heaving, one foreleg tucked wrong under the weight of itself, bleeding slow, the kind of bleeding that means decision, not accident. Around it, smaller shapes kept watch, a fox, a cat, a raccoon with a torn ear, all of them still as votives, all of them holding in their bodies the same tense readiness I recognized from hospital waiting rooms and divorce court. "Don't," Nora murmured when I moved forward. But the thing's eyes found me the way a storm finds the line between two counties, and I couldn't not. "What are you?" I asked, and it shuddered, and for a blink the face was a boy's again, lips cracked, a smear of mud like a mustache drawn by a cruel sibling. "Hungry," it said, and the word meant more than food. It meant the river when it floods. It meant my bed in October. It meant the sound I make when I wake from a dream where Nora still wears the ring we never bought. I sat in the leaves because I didn't trust my knees, and the cold slid into me the way a mother tucks in a blanket too tight. Why us? I asked, which is the question everyone always asks, because fate looks like a choice from far away. The creature closed its eyes, as if sleep might be a place instead of a verb, and opened them slow. And I saw in the blue a riverbank in winter, a line of footprints that went out and never came back. A woman's scarf caught on a branch like a prayer flag. A community that turned its back on something it couldn't name, and then wondered why the naming happened anyway. We broke a rule, Nora said, voice very small, like a person reading the last line of a story with no last page. Or inherited one broken before we were born, I said, which is always easier because it lets you keep your hands clean in your own mind. The fox yawned, showing small teeth arranged in a perfect, polite row. The raccoon washed its hands the way raccoons do when they want to make an impression. Micah stood between me and the creature, trembling, tail wagging in tiny neutral arcs like a politician, trying to please both sides. A sound came from the water like a sheet torn in half in the next room. A shape rose from the river like a question. Not human, not animal, but the idea of both, wrapped in moss and patience, crowned in reed tassels that shed their seeds into the dark like stars, forgetting how to hold themselves. It moved with the arrogant grace of weather, and stopped just far enough from shore to make you want to wade in to hear it better. Go home, it said, without opening a mouth, the words arriving in the pressure change just behind my ears. No, Nora said, surprising both of us, because the word leapt from her like a fish that has learned a new river and won't apologize. The water thing tilted its reed crown and looked at her like a teacher looks at the one child who will cost them sleep. Return what was taken, it said, and the missing faces fluttered in my mind like a deck of cards. But the order was wrong, and every shuffle laid down the same trump. Hunger, taken by who? I asked. But the water moved past the question like a person stepping over a snake and pretending it was a rope. Return what was promised, it said, and something within me turned to face something else within me, and they recognized each other and didn't break eye contact. My grandmother's stories arrived without their borders. Of the old town's bargain when the mill was built, of offerings left by the sluice after the first boy drowned, of a silver-backed mirror given in thanks that no one ever thought to return. We don't have a shrine, Nora said, helpless and furious, which is a combination that tastes like pennies and spring. We have a thrift store, I said, because sometimes you have to build a temple out of what your town still has left. The water turned away, not dismissed, just done, the way weather is done when it's finished with your county. The creature on the leaves lifted its head, hearing something we couldn't, and its eyes told me the moon was moving into a house on the sky chart that meant more hunger. We can end it, Nora said, and I didn't ask how because the word end is a candle you keep lit with whatever grease you have. The plan we made had steps, and steps have always been a comfort for those of us who didn't get to keep the people we wanted. We would gather silver, true silver, not plating from the town's thrift store, and estate sales and bottom drawers, from jewelry boxes meant for daughters and boxes of medals meant for mantles. We would build a mirror big enough to show the creature itself in a way it couldn't refuse and couldn't survive. Or save, Nora said quietly, and the word save had too many doors, and we opened all of them. If what it was can be unstitched from what it is, I said, we owe it the seam ripper. And my voice shook, because mercy is a knife you must be careful with, or you'll cut the wrong thing loose. The fox blinked and vanished into grass. The cat arched and left. The raccoon washed its hands of us. The creature put its head down and pretended to sleep. We went home not because we were safe there, but because you need a table to spread your fear on and count it. Micah paced and refused to be in rooms alone, and I understood that the body knows when it's a border. We emptied drawers and jewelry boxes and old cigar tins, laying out rings and spoons, earrings that had lost their mates, and lockets without photographs. A pilgrim's worth of silver that remembered other wrists. The mirror we made was ugly and holy, a mosaic of glass teeth and foxed backing and soldered seams, a thing that could only have been built by people who were both too tired and too stubborn to build anything else. We carried it at dusk to the birch grove, two people walking a door they hoped would open the right way. The air tasted like it had opinions. The river whispered its old arithmetic. Loss plus hunger equals a shape you don't have a name for yet. We planted the mirror in the churned earth with a thump that echoed through the trunks and settled in my sternum like a new rule. Come, I said to the night, and it did, courteous for once. They came as they always do, in an order that doesn't belong to clocks. First the small, sliding into the open places between roots, keeping their eyes averted, as if shy, or as if obeying a rule they wished we would ask them about. Then the middling, a lean coyote ashamed of its ribs, a deer with one antler that looked like a question mark, a dog that could have been Micah's brother if the world had gone differently, all stepping delicately as if the ground were borrowed. Last, as ever, the creature that wore hunger like a coat, walking slower now, breathing firefly fast, eyes so blue they made me think of July, lakes I'd loved before I learned lakes keep secrets. We stood behind the mirror like children playing store, unarmed except for the one weapon that isn't, which is a promise said with your whole face. Look, Nora told it, voice even, a hand on the top edge to steady the frame. And the way she held the mirror was how you hold a baby and a flag and a knife when all three are the same thing. The creature stepped forward as if walled by invisible kindnesses. It stopped when its reflection resolved into a full body, when the mosaic turned it into 1,000 pieces of itself, and all of them true. It flinched, not back, but inward, like a person remembering something they had set down a long time ago, because carrying it had cost them hands. In the shards, we saw multiple histories, the way you can see your face at different angles if you stand between two barbershop mirrors. In one, a little boy with a scrape on his knee cried, at a riverbank, his mother had told him not to visit, and the river had answered with a hand. In another, an old bargain had been written in mud and resigned each spring by people too tired to think of new gods. Return what was promised, the river said from everywhere and nowhere at once, the words bowing the birches and making the clouds stumble. We don't know what that is, I said, and the ignorance felt like a sin I could have avoided by paying more attention when my grandmother spoke. Blood, the river said, simple as a receipt, and I understood too late, as always, that we had brought the wrong offering all this time. The creature blinked and breathed and blinked, and I could see the arithmetic changing behind its eyes. Take mine, I said, because there it was, the oldest answer, the easiest coin. No, Nora said, the word leaving her with a chunk of warmth attached, and she stepped in front of me with the mirror. And there is a bravery that doesn't belong to living or dying, but to staying. And she wore it without trying. Take ours, she said to the river, and the creature, and the sky, and whatever keeps score. And I felt the floor inside me slide, and I hated and loved her in the same spike of breath. Not like that, the river said, impatient, as if we were children trying to pay with buttons. And the reed crown shed a small rain of seed that became fish in the shallows. Take back what is yours, it said to the creature, and the blue eyes flickered, and in a dozen shards of imperfect silver, I watched as the boy inside the beast tried to find the zipper of his coat. Its claws scraped at its chest where we'd driven the silver frame, tearing fur and skin in strips that came away with the sound of Velcro and old paper. And blood made the pattern of a map I had once driven across to save a love I couldn't. Stop, I whispered, because mercy is a reflex like blinking. Let him, Nora said, not cruel, just clear. And I gripped the mirror, because if the weight left my hands, I would float away. The creature bent, and something bent inside me. And for a terrible second, it seemed like it would turn its teeth on its own flesh and unweave itself to meet the river's command. But it hesitated, and that pause, oh God, that pause, was the most human thing I had ever seen. The moon shouldered the last cloud aside like a bouncer who'd done this too many nights, and the light became a blade that cut the grove into yes and no. In the shards, the boy's face steadied, and he raised one hand, still claw, still wrong, still his, and pressed it flat to the glass over his heart. I don't know how, he said, and the admission emptied me of every stone I'd carried, as if confession were its own flood. I'll show you, Nora said, because that is who she is when it matters. And she put her own palm over his on the other side of the glass. It burned her. The skin sizzled and smoked where the foxed silver kissed flesh through 1,000 numerator slivers. and she did not move her hand. "Here," she murmured, "press here and breathe like this. And think of the first time you knew your name." And I remembered that summer at the lake when she dove deeper than she ever had and surfaced laughing with an old beer can held up like treasure. The creature tried, pressed, breathed, thought, and the glass showed flickers like a projector on a wrinkled sheet, birthday candles, a scraped knee, a grandmother's lap with tobacco hands, a town parade with paper flowers that shed dye on small fingers. "Hold," Nora said through clenched teeth, as the smell of her own burning crowded the night. "Hold," I echoed, because sometimes your only job is to be the second voice on the same note. The creature's shoulders shook, its ribs rolled, its face became a field where two armies had agreed to meet, and had not agreed to anything else. In the mirror, one shard showed only the boy's eye, blue and too bright, and in that single piece I saw the needle jump, a seam unpicking, a thread letting go. It did not turn back. That's a story with different weather. What it did was worse and better. It split itself the way an oath splits a person, and one part fell forward into the glass, and the other part howled and ran. The running part hit the birches at a speed that made the trunks whistle like flutes. It vanished into a dark that moved to make room. The part that fell into the mirror did not vanish. It became weight, and the frame sagged, and my arms trembled, and there was a new face in the mosaic. A boy's, quiet now, not hungry, looking as if he had finally reached the other side of the river and found the person he was meant to meet. Nora collapsed, her palm blistered, and raw skin cooked into a topography that would never be the same map. I wrapped it in my shirt, and Micah licked the air the way dogs do when blood is a language in the room. The river sighed, the birches leaned back into their casual poses, the small animals left the way. A congregation leaves when the organ plays that song. The sky did what skies do when they have finished recording. It shrugged. We walked home with the mirror between us, heavier now, which is exactly how grief works when you finally put it somewhere on purpose. On the kitchen table, the mosaic showed our faces warped and brave and wrong. And in the bottom left corner, the boy's face glimmered like a coin under shallow water. We slept in shifts, while the house learned our names again. We fed Micah steak, because heroism has a stomach. At dawn, Nora bandaged her hand with the tenderness you reserve for the part of the story that saved you as well as hurt you. The flyers at St. Cyril's didn't come down. Not that day. Not for weeks. It is hard work to teach a town new math. But Benji's mother lit 2 tea lights, and one of them was for a boy whose name no one had printed, because no one had known it until a river and a mirror helped him remember. The creature, the running part, the hunger with legs, still lives in the green seams of our town. We hear it some nights, singing the old wrong note lullaby, but softer now, as if it knows it is only part of a story, not its whole author. We do not walk to the birches on full moon nights. We also do. On the first snow, Nora moved her toothbrush back into the holder without a speech, and the domestic anthem of our mornings began to compose itself in coffee steam and dog nails on tile. Some afternoons, we carry the mirror out to the porch and let the sun write its name across the silver while we sit beside it and do nothing, which is another way of praying. When the whistle comes thin from the river, we listen and do not let the door open even when the knock is polite. Mercy is not the same as surrender. Hunger is not the same as need. Love is not the same as safety. But it is as close as we get this side of the water. And when the birches shiver because something has passed that isn't wind, we lift our hands to the glass and wait to see who will need to remember their name tonight. Who will need to remember their name tonight.